One. Hey, everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. Before I get to today's amazing guest, I want to draw everybody's attention to the website, www, I think there's one too many W's, markpattisonnfl.com. And again, there's loads of podcasts. I've done 225 of these about incredible people doing amazing things. I would appreciate a ratings and review to help elevate the popularity of the show. Number one. Number two is I am headed now down to Ecuador to climb a mountain called Cotopaxi for a birthday for me coming up. And I continue to look for different challenges, and you'll see different updates about that journey and expedition coming up soon on the website. Finally, I have the movie that's now out on YouTube, Searching for the Summit. The NFL created this incredible piece of art that I'm really proud of. It involves my daughter who has epilepsy and the healing powers that have gone on with that. And then just as a recap and staying on that same line, there's a philanthropy tab. I continue to raise money for Higher Ground, for Amelia's Everest, and we're all out trying to help others get healed. Okay, so that's that on the website. Let's get into today's guest. I've known this dude for a long time. He had a great career. We had a very similar career in the NFL. And now I'm very happy to have him on the podcast. Ed Cunningham, how are you doing?
Hi, Mark. I wish I was Googling you the whole time. I'd go donate and all that. It's amazing, all the stuff you got going on.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how life happens, and we're going to get into your life, and you've been the one thing I really have appreciated about you and your journey is you've always kept it really interesting. I remember many years ago, the Washington Huskies, who you also played for, you were more, I think about maybe 5 years that you came after me and part of that great 91 championship team with all those amazing players. But I can remember being down in some bar and the Huskies were playing Arizona State and you're all gunned up and you're playing for the Cardinals, and we had a great chat, and you just had so many other interests beyond just the NFL. And I just have always really appreciated those who have just taken their star power and trying to do other things and have that brain, in high gear of thinking, what's life after football and how's it going to go? And for you, you had a very successful run, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But let's go back to your, and I don't want to spend too much time here, but I want to, they always talk about that 91 team with Edmund and everybody else as being one of the greatest Husky teams of all time. I would disagree. I think our 85 team that beat Oklahoma is the greatest team of all time.
Well, the 90 team would have beat us all. We just didn't know how good we were. The 90 team, I think, was actually better than the 91 team. If they played, we had 4 or 5 seniors, including Dennis Brown, a guy named Travis Richardson, Greg Lewis when he was healthy.
Great player.
So we had some guys on that 90 team. We just we stubbed our toe late in the season against UCLA, but I'd argue for the 90 team maybe.
Well, however you slice it, the reality is, what's in the scorebook. And the reality is you guys won the national championship and won the Rose Bowl. It was amazing to follow, and there were so many great athletes, and as a result of that, you went on. And I've talked many times about what Don James, our former head coach, Hall of Famer, now passed away. But what did he do for you? What was the roadmap of life he gave you?
I think, Mark, and it's guys who played for Don James. I think we all share a unique thing that we were challenged, because I know you are the same way. I mean, obviously you built a terrific career post your playing career, is we were challenged on and off the field. I never felt like it was a football factory, but it was a football factory. We still worked as hard. We still had a leading edge weight room and explosive trade. We did all of the things. We changed our entire offense. We were one of the first offenses that ran the one back offense. Washington State was first. We were second, I think, in all of major college football. So there was all cutting edge football factory, but all the doors were not only open for us on campus, but also around the community. But Coach James built a structure where he had business people coming in and talk to us. We got business cards from these guys. I sat down with one of the Nordstrom brothers before I left just to talk about business. And, you know, some of the guys who built downtown Seattle who used to play for the Huskies opened their door. And that really helped me see sort of, well, there can be an entrepreneur side to this stuff too, because I've got to meet older guys that had graduated and become in the construction business or, you know, whatever their business was. And I think that was the thing when people talk about the program. And I do a podcast, but I'm also thinking about a book of Coach James' program and how you apply it to your life and to businesses. Because Nick Saban, whenever he brings up influences, it starts with Don James. And that was the part for me that I could have gone to other colleges where I think it would have just been about football and maybe you'd meet some boosters because they just wanted to hang out with you. But there was always a purpose when we met people. There was always, this guy is here to talk to you about the finance business. And he's brought some colleagues with him. You know, we had these presentations and that was just, and Seattle at the time, probably one of the best sports eras. That's when, you know, the tech industry started booming, late 80s, early 90s. Grunge is going on, best music in the world, best music scene in the world. So I was able to experience that because we were allowed to have lives away, just be there on time and try hard. You know, we got time off, we got to go do other things. So I was really grateful because I didn't know any of that when I went there. I went there because I was chasing a girl and there was Don James. It worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, I think those of us who got to know him and play for him or be around him and work for him, that was the unique part is we did both. We did life and we did football full time. I mean, we worked hard. You know, we were in the modern era where you were in there all the time working.
Yeah, I think what the thing I'm liking about the way you're describing the story is that the evolution of our head coach, Don James, because all the little goodies that you just spit out, we didn't have. We didn't have business people come and talk to us. And as a wide receiver, you know, you guys had the benefit of Keith Gilbertson coming in and really starting that whole West Coast offense where you're putting 4 receivers on the field. And we were loaded with talent at receiver. You know, back in my day, everybody, quarterbacks and receivers all went off to the NFL, everybody. And so it would have been great to have been part of an offense like that. But what you're describing is Don James, like, because I remember kind of in the gap between myself graduating at the time was the highest ranked we'd ever been. We beat Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl, and getting to really 1990. There was some lean years in there where, you know, it's just like,
oh yeah,
he had to reinvent.
Yeah, I was there when he was on the hot seat.
He was on the hot seat, right? And so that was not a slam dunk. And so it's wonderful for a guy that's aging, that's always done things the exact same way. It's always kind of worked for him the exact same way. All of a sudden, things aren't working so well.
He flipped it on its head. I was there when it happened. We lost to Washington State, really good Washington State team coached by Dennis Erickson with the one-back offense. And we were up 28-3 at half. This is 1988, I think. And they beat us 31-28. So we didn't score a point. And they rattled off 28 in the second half to beat us. And it dropped us 6-5. They went to the Aloha Bowl. We stayed home for the first time since probably before you got there. I mean, it was like a 10 or 12 year run. They'd gone to bowls. And a lot of us were going to leave. I was gone. My bags were packed. I didn't like my coach. And I will say the offense was as stale as it gets. You know, we were not doing anything interesting. One thing that kept a lot of us around is before he changed recruiting and this was through Dick Baird and what Dick Baird brought to the program. Yeah. I think he started to trust Dick more, and he started trust Dick that he could get really good athletes, because we had some ballers in my class above me, my class, and Steve Entman and Lincoln Kennedy and Mark Brunell's class. We could play. We had a lot of guys who could play. So the talent we could see was there, but it was just headed in the wrong direction. The team morale was awful. People were infighting. Some of the older guys wouldn't even practice hard by the end of the season, just sort of mailing it in. I'm waiting for the NFL, and all the young guys are like, yeah, that's not how it works, man. You gotta play hard to go play in the NFL. And then two really major things happened, which was we went a little away from let's just be the biggest brutes up front and have the biggest, strongest guys, where we all actually started losing some weight and getting quicker and faster. And there was a absolute focus on speed, not only in recruiting, but also we all got faster. So we redid our entire training program from lots of hours in the weight room to more hours with plyometrics, running techniques. You may know Jeff Woodruff, who coached receivers, and Jeff really took on that program. We brought in an Olympic sprinting coach. And then, recruiting people like Napoleon Kaufman, Bean Bryant, guys who had world-class speed helped. We also got faster. And then there was two big changes where Keith Gilbertson comes in and saves a lot of guys that would have left. I would have left. Bern Brostek, who was a number 8 pick or whatever, would have left. We were just all miserable. Gilby comes in, he's a great guy. He keeps people there, and the offense is amazing. At the same time, Jim Lambright really doesn't get the credit that he deserves, because Gilby did something that was so unique with a one-back offense, and you throw it, and Don James had to get very comfortable with the short passing game being safe. And he just like, you just got to keep trusting me. It is safe. It's like, it's not getting returned the other way. We don't do that. You don't throw to, Gilby really had his plan, but Jim went to an attacking style. He had enough defensive backs where they could play a lot of man-to-man. And then he started doing these really cool coverages that were hard to read, stuff that just wasn't in college football. And I'll tell a story. I covered Virginia Tech, and Bud Foster was a defensive coordinator there. This is 25 years after he went on a visit to Washington. He was still using stuff Jim Lambright used 25 years later at Virginia Tech. And then we just had guys who could play, and we had a good, and then the culture changed because we were all good guys. We like to compete, but you're right. I was there when it happened. He completely changed everything. Having Keith Gilbertson come in, realizing they had to make it probably a more holistic program, I think really did. Not forget save jobs. We wouldn't have risen those heights any night. So you're right. I was there when it all happened. It was at 88, 89, 90. Well, it sort of started in 87, but that 88, 89, 90 transition was, he flipped it all on its head. But I'll say this, and you know him well enough.
Yeah.
It was like it was all meant to be, and here's the new plan.
Yeah.
There was never any, oh, what do we do? The house on fire. I mean, when he showed up, and we were just, he still ran it as a really well-oiled machine. But you're right. In many ways, it's all brand new for him in those years.
Yeah. And this, I mean, if you're not growing, you're dying. Okay. In other words, you're either going forward or you're going backwards. So the whole neutral thing, especially in college, big time college sports, in the NFL doesn't work, really any kind of sport. You end up getting drafted by the Arizona Cardinals. And again, we'll just touch on that for just a minute. But what was your NFL career experience like?
It was bad in a couple of ways, in that I was drafted by an organization that's now great, the Cardinals. But at the time, it was a family-owned operation, and it just wasn't the slickest business unit. And that sort of showed up. I came into a really dysfunctional coaching situation where a few people in charge weren't the best for the job. And so that's hard, because a game like football, if you don't have the top 2 or 3 people really nailed down in the coaching tree, it's just not going to work. We had really good players. It was really hard. I mean, I don't know if you went through this, but it was just shocking how many guys looked and played like Steve Entman in the NFL. Yeah. Steve, you mentioned Steve Entman, who was a number 1 pick and won the Outland Lombardi. He was the only guy in college who could just sort of run me over whenever he wanted to. Yeah. When I got to the NFL, almost every guy you played could run you over anytime they wanted to. So it's just that level of physical effort, and playing at the line of scrimmage. You played, receiver, you're getting blown up by really big people. Line of scrimmage, I was grappling with some just huge, powerful men. And it was also brutality in camp. We had 5 days of two-a-days the first year I was in the NFL. Full go two-a-days. So 2.5 hours twice a day, and then played 4 preseason games. And then as a rookie who had been drafted high enough and was starting, I had to do all the reps in every preseason game. So I'm playing 50, 60 snaps a preseason game, and it was just brutal. The cherry on top was, though, I ended up back 4 years in Arizona, ended up back in Seattle with the Seahawks for just 1 year. And I was 1 foot out the door. Dennis Erickson was the coach, which brought it full circle. Keith Gilbertson was on that staff. Yeah. I had some interest. I got cut by the Bears going into camp, and I had some interest from a few teams. But Keith Gilbertson called me, and he's like, "Look, we got a good team," and they did. We were really good. We were in a very competitive division, and Dennis didn't beat us up. We had good players. We practiced one time a day in full pads during camp and did walkthroughs in the afternoon. My body never felt better. And we got 2 quarterbacks hurt. Otherwise, we'd probably a playoff team. And it was fun. Guys were good guys. I played with Chris Warren, who was, legendary player, but also just a great guy. We're both from Virginia, so I had a nice connection. So I'm so thankful that it ended. And I'll never forget leaving. Dennis Erickson called me in after our last meeting. And he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I think I'm out the door." And he tried to talk me into staying, which I was flattered by, because he liked having me around, and we were similar guys, a sense of humor. And he looked at me, he's like, "Yeah, I thought you were gone." He just knew it. I'd had enough.
Well, look, for many of us who have played the game, when you add up all the hours and the days and everything else, and you go back to really, starting at the University of Washington, I'm not counting high school, but at the UW, I was there 5 years because I redshirted a year. But whether you count that as 4 or 5, and then you go into the NFL and there's another 5, it's really 10 years competing at the highest level.
Yeah.
And, I'd love to tell you that I went to the UW and I studied microbiology or something, but I was really majored in football. I mean, that's really what it got down to. And so, going off that cliff was really hard for me. And I want to ask you about that because as you did ultimately transition into something that so many players want to go after, but it's such a competitive space, but somehow or another, you were able to rise above all the other guys or girls that are out there trying to become a broadcaster in college football, and you actually did it. So was that gap between making the decision that I need to walk away from football to what am I going to do next? Was that hard, or was that fairly seamless for you?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about. I started doing radio in '91 on KISW in Seattle during our senior season. Yeah. Actually, for my podcast, I have an episode with the guy Spike O'Neill, Spike on Sports.
This is a rock station. This is the rock station, right?
Yeah. He showed up the fall of '91. He's like, "I want to do a weekly show." And our sports information director at the time was like, Ed gives great sound bites. Use Ed. And so I got into radio. It didn't pay me, obviously, but I was on every week, and then would go into the studio. And then when I got to the NFL, I was that was right when sports radio was starting to happen. So it wasn't 24/7, but KTAR in Phoenix, which I think still carries the Cardinals, they had a 7 to 10 show Monday through Friday. And the general manager or somebody had heard I'd done some radio stuff. It was my second year in the NFL. And they brought me in and said, "Hey, you want to co-host a show for 3 hours?" Like, absolutely. So the summer before my second year in the NFL, I walked into a 3-hour radio show, had no idea what I was doing. The host brought us on the air. We went to the first break with 2 hours and 45 minutes left. And he got up and left. His wife was pregnant. He needed to go home. So I had to host 2 hours and 45 minutes on a huge AM station in a big market. And the news guy was like, "Just give the phone number out, have people call you." Well, people wanted to talk to the Cardinal. We were pretty good going into that year. I was draft pick. So I did calls. And then that led to doing some TV. I called arena games while I was still playing on TV. They had a team there, the Rattlers. So I did the local broadcast there. So I was side hustling the whole time, man. I was sort of 1 foot out. I almost stayed in 5 years just to prove I could sort of do it. Like, I got here and I could start and I could play. But those first couple of years in Arizona were really hard. I mean, it was just rough because it was a really physical game. We were 4-12. I had 2 seasons of 4-12 of the 5.
Not fun.
And no winning records. My best record was 8-8. My third year with the Cardinals. So, and at the line of scrimmage, so I was 1 foot outdoors. So it was actually the thing that helped was I'd done enough TV, and you talked about a competitive market. This was '96. Not everybody was running to the mic to be a broadcaster, and if they were going to the NFL. And I wanted to, because I wasn't a big deal in the NFL. I was a starting center for bad teams for 4.5 seasons, right? But I'd won a national championship in college, so I got a media agent. My football agent helped me get a really good media agent. He's like, "Let's pitch you to some college broadcasters." So I had tape. I knew how to do it, and it wasn't a crowded field yet. It was just before I think it became the thing to do. I think I got here, slipped in the door right before. So it was really seamless. So my last game was December of '96. I was on the air with CBS doing South Carolina at Georgia for CBS in September of '97. So it took off, and I had 3 years of broadcasting radio and on TV Rattlers games at that point. So I wasn't a TV rookie, but my first job out of the NFL was right to CBS. It was amazing, really fun.
Yeah, well, it is amazing, and way to go for you to really be thinking ahead and about your transition from the NFL and what you're going to do, and then. In 2000, you go to ABC, which ultimately I believe was acquired by ESPN. There's some merger in there. And so, I would always turn on the TV and, you were, I don't know if you're the number 1 or 2 or how they slot that, but you were fairly high up there on the totem pole.
Yeah, it was nice. So I straddled that. So I left CBS to go to ABC. And I'll just give you, because you're a football person, you'll get this. And I got that job because that's when Dan Fouts went to Monday Night Football. So a seat in college football opened up, and it happened to be Dan Fouts' seat. So when I got to ABC, I was already slotted in that it's the 3:30 East Coast window. That's sort of the window, unless you get the big primetime game now. But the 3:30 window is where they either do the full national or they split it amongst 1 or 2 or 3 games. And so I got that seat, and then. I worked with great people, because once you get to that level, your play-by-play guy is great, your producer's great, your director's great. It's like high level. So it's easy to, I think, well, it's easier to excel and do your job if you have full support. I mean, by the end of my career, I was working with camera people and directors for years, where we could in 5 minutes have a conversation and they know exactly, what I was looking for, or they could share something that they think would support it or whatever. But yeah, that seat's pretty great. We would, some of those Saturday games, if there were 3 of us, you'd sort of think, okay, you'd hope the other 2 games would turn into blowouts and your game was competitive, because then they bring the full audience to you.
Right. Yeah.
And when they do that, the audience usually grows. So we had games where we were broadcasting like 14, 15 million people by the end of the game. Yeah, it was really cool.
Well, look, finding your summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And your star could not have been brighter. You're standing on top of the mountain, and we're going to get into it for some personal reasons. Really, not you necessarily personally, but just the way that the game was shaping in your stance against CTE and the concussion protocols and everything like that. You literally jumped off the mountain. And, it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of balls. It takes a lot of gumph to do that, when you're also walking away from a salary, and the notoriety and the relationships and all that kind of stuff. And, I think all of us were blown away when you didn't make that move. And it speaks a lot to your character on, at the end of the day, doing what you felt was the right thing to do.
Well, when I left ESPN 2017, I left. My last season, I think, was 2016, and then shared my story about my concern for the safety of the players. A lot of it, Mark, was I was calling college games. I mentioned I chose college because I had many chances I had a chance to actually stay at CBS at one point, and they were going to offer me a really nice NFL package. And I turned it down because I just didn't want to cover the NFL. I just enjoyed the college game more. I liked the atmosphere more. I like games being on Saturday, so I'm home on Sunday. I sort of like that life. But the part for me, when I was starting to make more money and get a higher profile, this is before name, image, and likeness was given back to the athletes just this past July. Those guys, you were there. I was there when Don James became the first 7-figure head coach. He was the first person to make $1 million so I was there when that stuff was happening. And so my biggest issue was I had some issues with the safety of the game. But what we were asking of these young men, and sometimes still just teen boys, because they get there 17, 18, 19, they're still teenagers, was I thought too much, that they weren't getting anything in return. They were employees. It was time to start treating them as that.
Mhm.
And, I had to make a choice of, do I share that story or not share that story? Because I could have just rode off into the sunset and not shared it. If I had left an NFL gig for that concern, I wouldn't have shared it, because who cares? It's professional, and they're still young men when they get there, but it's a different, structure than college sports. But the reason I shared it is because it was amateurs. The reason I was leaving that job was because it was amateurs. And so I felt like I sort of needed to, like you said, you have a platform. I wanted one last sort of thing, is like, this is not fair to these kids. And I'm thrilled that the dam has broken on this name, image, and likeness, and that these kids can start profiting off of what they own. It's one of our most prime rights as an American citizen, is your identity. And now that these kids can profit. So I'm glad I spoke up. I learned some things that I didn't expect came out of that. Not all good. You never know the sort of consequences, but I'm glad I did, because of the amateurism. You and I played college sports. It's time for these kids to get a piece of the pie.
So did you have a plan? Like, you're going through this. It was heavy on your mind, heavy on your heart, heavy on your soul. But did you have like, okay, so when you just get down to you take the emotional side out of it, and you insert the business side into it, and you're going, okay, I'm making X. Now, how we're going to replace that pipeline? I mean, what was going through your mind there?
Yeah, well, the other thing I've been doing was sort of a side hustle and became the main hustle, is I'm a filmmaker and producer, and I have some entrepreneurial interests. So that's been a part of the big transition for me, is, like you said, getting off that salary and becoming an independent businessman.
Yeah.
And, it's more of a grind, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's more of a profit and loss rests on my desk. But I'm growing there. It's becoming easier to do that. So that transition's been, it was a little slow to start on purpose. When I left, I just needed a little, I gotta just get off the treadmill. I've been traveling for like 22 weeks a year for a long time, and really grinding at that job. So I needed to step off of it. But yeah, that's been the piece, is becoming now producer, more filmmaking. I've just gotten into the merchandise business. We got a launch coming of a merchandise line here pretty soon. So just, stepping off of that, and a lot of that very much connected to sports. Almost everything I work on is some type of football connection, some sports story. That's what I know, what I love. But I have a film that just came out now about a World War II veteran, a documentary. So I still, have interests away from sports, but a lot of it is focused around, what I've done and known my whole life.
Yeah. So I'll go back to what we talked about earlier about Don James, from that gap we were talking about, from 1987 to 1990, roughly, when like he either had to like up his game and evolve and shape, or he was going to be out of the game that he so much loved and he was so good at, right? And you had to do essentially the same thing. Now, I know you just said that you were starting to like dip your toe into the whole movie doc, business, but there's no guarantees behind that. And it's a very competitive business. Once again, kind of like, the NFL was, and playing major college football at the University of Washington and being on championship teams and being in the broadcast business, but you were able to actually get up there. So this goes back. I don't have this in front of me, the actual night. I know you will know this night, but I'm watching the Oscars, and all of a sudden they throw these names down, and I'm watching you standing up on stage collecting an Oscar for the Undefeated. I was just what? And I text you like, "Wow, man, this is so cool! It's, congrats." And yet again, it's kind of like some of the things that I think that, you mentioned early on is very kind of you, but, I've immersed myself in many of these different things, the film, the climbing, philanthropy. There's a book coming, my work with Sports Illustrated. But you got to put yourself in those positions, right? You got to step into the fear, if that's what that was for you. Like, you had no idea, but if you don't go out there and you swing the bat, man, you're never going to get the opportunity to stand on stage and hold the golden Oscar. I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah, that was a cool moment. I think I got 1,200 texts in 3 hours. My phone eventually died because I had it on vibrate. And I think for me, staying grounded and I didn't make that movie for the money. I haven't made a lot of money off of it, frankly.
Wow.
And I think that's one of the things I've been able to do is stay true to what I want to work on and be able to choose that. And I think that helps me because I've always sort of done it that way. I think that helps me want to take big swings and maybe they don't work out, and producing is a lot like that. I mean, I have a list of 35 projects that, never got made for this reason or that or whatever. You just got to keep churning them out basically. But, that night in particular, it was the perfect combination of my worlds because it was an independent documentary film that I made with 6 guys about football. So it was my whole sort of realm. And I sort of work with 6 or 7 people now on average across a couple projects, and I keep it, pretty small. There's no reason for me to become some big production entity. But that night was, and that was a project I didn't want to work on. A partner of mine, Seth Gordon, who's also from Seattle, his parents professors there at the University of Washington. But he called me and he said, "Hey, I met these young filmmakers. They need some savvy producers to help make this film. They have an idea, they have access. It's about football." And I was like, I had no interest because I was already calling games on ESPN. I get enough football on the fall. If I'm going to help make an independent film, I want it to be about a rock band or The King of Kong, which is about Donkey Kong. I want it to be a little quirky. Mm-hmm. But I met the guys, Dan Lindsay and TJ Martin, who directed the film, and Rich Middlemas, who's the producer who found the story and moved to Memphis with them ultimately to film. I met them. They're smart guys. They'd already made a film, so I could see their work. It was real good work. And so we said, well, go film some stuff and come back and let's see. And they went there, they got access, they filmed for like 2 weeks. They came back and they cut together, 8 or 10 minutes about like 6 characters, including the coach, Bill Courtney, who becomes one of the key figures. And I just was in tears, man. I was like, oh my God, this is so much more than just football. And I think that was part of my job working with those guys, especially through the edit, is how do we give as little football as possible for it to matter and connect to all the stories off the field? Because you can't just be on the field. And they immersed themselves. We had 4,000 hours of embedded documentary footage to make that hour and 50-minute film. 4,000 hours. They filmed all the time for 5 months, all the time. It's amazing.
That is amazing. And the thing I love about what you said is that when you got the 1,200 text, you're able to be in a state of mind that you could really have that sink in and be present with those people like me. I was just, you didn't need to text me back, but you did. It was nothing big, but just, appreciate you or something. And the same thing happened to me when I summited Mount Everest. And, kind of leading up to that, there was trying to become the first NFL player to do it. And there's a lot of notoriety that's come my way. I'm very grateful for that, in the movie and, other things. But the common point is I was able to be really present because I already had my 15 minutes of fame way back in the day. And as a immature young punk, I did whatever I did back then, but I was really able to just like sink it in because I just know that those moments are just moments in time. And just like my Everest thing, the attention, that all goes off the cliff. And the question is, what's really going to sustain
what's after
you?
that?
What's after that? And that's kind of really where my head's at. And I can tell that, you won that, but now you're on to these other movie projects on how you can affect emotion and change with other people.
And also for me, it was accepting, for me, it helped me feel validated within the Hollywood world because I'd always been an outsider, always been a jock. No, a lot of meetings I have in Hollywood, they have I would have been on air that Saturday calling a game in front of millions of people on ABC and have a meeting on Thursday at a network to pitch a show. And that person would have no idea that I was on the air that Saturday because it really is, other than a few areas like Sports Illustrated with their studio deal, there are places that do sports, but most of Hollywood doesn't really care. So that was a way for me, and through a sports football movie, where for me, it just helped with the confidence of, hey, I belong here. It does help to sort of have a little swagger, have a little confidence in what you're doing. I think in anything you do, football, Hollywood, whatever, walk in the room, have a presence about you, you belong. know that. Not, the Oscar, I didn't need the Oscar for that, but it was a little like, okay, man, you got this. You belong here. You can play this game.
No, for sure. I mean, look, you do belong, and there's nothing better on your resume when, if you're a mountain climber and you're saying Mount Everest or the NFL or Sports Illustrated, or you want an Oscar. I mean, that also means that there's a lot of hard work and dedication. And that's all the stuff that people don't see behind the scenes of what it takes to make a champion. And that's a champion in a different way, but you were a champion, and, you always, for sure, always belong in the room talking to any one of those guys. I got to ask you, just like this is like the People magazine mark coming out in me right now of, you're in that world. I'm not. Who give me an example of the biggest star you've been able to, and I know you're more on the documentary side, but have you been able to, with your Oscar, in any way you're hanging out with Brad Pitt, or I don't know, I'm just making this up.
So it did change that level, because if you're a doc maker, you're not really in that world.
Yeah.
But two things happened where we won the Oscar, and then the guy who's my at the time was more a regular partner, but we still partner on stuff. I mentioned his name, Seth Gordon. Seth is now a really A-list director and TV executive producer. And so I go on sets a lot, or we've done things that became something he made, and I'll go. I actually worked on a show with Christian Slater for a while called Breaking In. That was on Fox. And, so I've been in production or around stuff like that, but not as much as nonfiction. But the coolest thing was the weekend of the Oscars. It's sort of changed now, obviously COVID, whatever, but each of the major Hollywood agencies, one of their partners or owners would host a weekend party. Oscars are on Sunday. So on Saturday, from 5 to midnight is always those parties. Well, we all got invited to Ari Emanuel's house of Endeavor WME, who had a character, Ari Gold, in that movie Entourage. Like, this is literally that guy.
Wow.
So we went to his home in Westwood, and because they have the parties regularly, his backyard, you didn't know you were in a backyard. The whole yard had a massive tent structure across the entire thing. Part of it was over the pool, part of it was over the basketball court. So you're in this, 25,000 square foot tent with a food area and bathrooms over there. They just built it, and it's custom built for this guy's yard.
Yeah.
And in that room, everybody's guard was down. Nobody was big time in anybody. And a couple of things happened. One was I was with Seth Gordon, and I was standing there, and 5 heads of major studios in Hollywood were all standing there having a drink and talking. And Seth, my partner, was like, "Hey, you want to go meet 5 studio heads?"
Of course.
And we turn around, and he was like, "Hey guys, this is," because Seth had worked with a couple of them already. He's like, "Hey, this is Ed. He produced King Kong." We're like, "Hey, whatever." I sat there and shot the bull for 25 minutes with 5 studio execs, and ended up talking to one of their wives for a long time about kids. So that was, forget all the stars. That was pretty cool. And it was just because it was just low key. And business didn't come up, which is very unusual for Hollywood. It was, "Hey, oh, you guys are nominated for that. Congrats." It was more fun and jovial. It was amazing. But every time you turned around, there was an A-lister standing there talking to somebody. And you could just say, "Hi, hey, what's up?"
Yeah.
See you. It was pretty great.
Well, again, you got to put yourself in those positions, and you certainly did. So I guess the last question of the hour here is, what is next for you? What is next for Ed? What's on the horizon? I imagine it's another doc or another movie that you're working on right now.
So I have a bunch of projects. One called Jerry's Last Mission that's out now. It's available, December 4th, it'll be available wide on Apple iTunes as a transactional video on demand. And I love the movie. So Jerry's Last Mission is about a World War II fighter pilot. He flew the last mission over Japan. The last combat mission, came home, had 4 sons, was really beat up with PTSD and not doing very well. He found something, and I don't want to give away what he did, but he really started to change his life around quite a bit. And then his youngest son moved back to Japan and married the daughter of a kamikaze pilot. And so we have this really great, unique story that's really uplifting called Jerry's Last Mission. So please go watch it. It's available, when this goes out.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's really great. Then I have a couple of other movies. I have helped produce a film called Chess Boxing. It's about chess boxing, called By Rook or Left Hook, which is a professionalized sport of boxing and speed chess mixed together.
Wow.
It's really sort of quirky and weird. But then, that's sort of my day-to-day grind. But you mentioned next big challenge. I'm in the process, and I mentioned to you on text, of maybe taking a position it's sort of a startup, but it's partnered with a major media company. So I can't talk about it, but I've been consulting on it for about 7 months, and now talking about taking an inside job, which would go back to what you were talking about with the ESPN. I'd go back into that sort of big company salary world, which wouldn't be the worst thing, but also it's something that would be a really great challenge and a whole big step for me. It'd be an executive. I've never been an executive in a company, and this is the role I would be taking, and that's pretty scary and pretty. It'd be all brand new for me, but I'm ready for it.
Well, you've always met the challenge at hand, and I have no doubt that you would do the same thing with this next challenge that's in front of you. So, all right, buddy, listen, where can people find you?
Oh, well, so I have a podcast. That's probably the easiest way. Let's Huddle with Ed Cunningham, wherever you podcast, and then on Twitter at Let's Huddle with. And then if you're on LinkedIn, I prefer LinkedIn if you want to reach out personally. I think that's a better way for people to connect, but I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm trying to be pretty responsive there. But Twitter at Let's Huddle with, and the podcast is Let's Huddle with Ed Cunningham.
Love it, love it, love it. All right, buddy, listen, it's great to get caught up with you after all these years, a fellow Husky. He is the one, the only Ed Cunningham. Thank you.